Hey there folks. So in this video what we're going to look at is how we can actually spawn some static meshes and some elements into our PCG graph. So in previous videos we've looked at how the surface sampler works, and I'm just using that demo that we've previously made here. So I have a PCG volume that's been added in. If I just drag it over, you can see it gets the landscape data, and then we surface sample that so we can create some points that have an extent of 100, 100, 100, a little bit of looseness added, and some extra points per square meter. Although I don't think that's doing much really, because I've increased the looseness to spread them out. Now you might be looking at these trees and thinking, what are these trees over here doing? Well, these I've taken from the Synty Biomes pack. So you can see here, I'm in the Alpine Mountain pack, and I'm just going to use some of their trees in order to create this. So I've gone into models, looked inside of all the static meshes, and I've just gone and found all of the pine trees because I kind of like the idea of these. I'm going to make a forest that's spreading these out. Now I've added them here just because what I want to do is I want to just talk to you about the actual extents of the points a little bit. Now obviously here, if I was thinking about where this point is going to be, this is going to be a very small focused area. Whereas this one here, we might need to start thinking, if it's quite wide, do I actually want to do it for just the trunk of the tree, or do we want to have the whole width and size of the tree itself actually going to be used for the PCG? Now, for now, we'll just go with the trunk, but just keep that in mind. You know, each of these might actually have a different footprint when we think about it as a point. Now we've got our surface sampler. The thing that we're going to need is we're going to need a spawn node. So I'm going to add in a spawn node, and what we're going to see is there are actually two useful points for us. There's spawn actor and spawn mesh spawner, or static mesh spawner. So let's just add both of these in and just talk about the difference in them. Now the spawn actor, if we look over here, you'll have a template actor class, and this is great because it's a class. So essentially we can spawn anything, and even better, we can spawn blueprints. So if you wanted to make a blueprint that contained a static mesh of like a tree, but you wanted to have functionality on it so that you can walk up and you could obviously hit it multiple times to get it to be destroyed and drop wood, and you want to have the exact same with stone that drops, you know, different rock resources, going to work perfectly fine here. We can spawn a whole bunch of blueprints, we can spawn lights and everything else like that. So you can see here, everything is accessible. The problem with this is that it isn't an array, it's a single one. So this is where you might need to have different filters, and you might have to have filtering of these individual points and say, on the white values, I want to spawn actor and I want to spawn trees, whereas on the black values, I want to spawn rocks. The static mesh spawner, on the other hand, that is only going to spawn static meshes. So here, if I open this one and go and have a little look, we go into the mesh selector section. We expand out our mesh entries to start adding array elements, and I add one array element here. So index 0 is the first one. I have to expand out descriptor, and now you can see in here we have a whole bunch of different options, such as what is the static mesh we actually want to spawn, options in terms of the lighting of it, the collisions. So right now by default it's going to be on block all dynamic, whole bunch of stuff in terms of performance, and we'll have weight as well. We'll come back to the weight options in a bit. Okay, so let's go and start by actually putting this tree in. So I'm going to take this tree, Control B just to find it in my content browser, and I'm going to apply it here. Now this node here, this static mesh spawner, is now going to allow me for every single point that is given to it to spawn pine 02. So let's just connect up that at the end. Now you can see every single one of those point locations in my world now spawns a pine tree. Absolutely brilliant. Now the problem we've got here is we can still see the debug. We can always turn that off and turn it back on. It's useful to start thinking about how big these things are going to be. But maybe these are too close to each other. Maybe I need to spread them out. And this is where we jump back through our PCG graph and we make edits, and we can see those affecting the whole chain of it. Okay, so let's go in this surface sampler and let's start thinking about actually how big is a tree. Is 50 by 50 close enough? Maybe. I would say these pines have quite a small trunk, or central area. Maybe I need to go a little bit smaller. Maybe I need to go a little bit bigger. 50 by 50 works quite well for those, but there are quite a lot of these points. So I could always go and mess around with the points per square meter and see whether dropping that down is going to spread them out. There you go. That's obviously helped out quite a lot. And if I need to, I can always right click and go play from here. And I can go and have a look at what this looks like in the actual game as well. So once I've got in there, there you go. And once I've got in there with Manny or Quinn, I can have a little bit of a run around. You can see the debug, even while you're playing, you can see the debug, which is quite useful to actually judge how big these things are in comparison to the player. But it's very useful to do this. If you're going to create a game where you need the character to be walking around in first person or third person, get yourself down into the scene. Don't just look at it from the volume and be detached from it. Look at what it's going to look like in terms of the density and the size of these elements when you're actually playing. Okay, so that is spawning our static meshes. What else can we do? Well, the first issue I've got here is that I have a lot of the exact same tree. And I have 5 trees over here that I might want to use. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go into this static mesh spawner and I'm going to extend out this mesh entries array to add some more options. And I'm just going to do this really quickly. I'm going to show you how quick and easy this can be. I'm going to add in a bunch of options. So I've got 5 array elements because there are 5 trees here that I want to use. You can see most of them have now disappeared, and that is because they are each reading a different area, but they have no static mesh assigned to them. It could be a bit of a pain to have to expand out and go and find these options, but once you've got all of them there, what you can do is search in the top and search for static mesh, and in the static mesh now you'll see it actually shows you all of those options, which is a much easier, much quicker way of finding these. Using my little tip as well, Control B to find them in the content browser, and then you can just use the arrow. And this is why I test them in the world first to see what size and scale they're going to be. You know, you can look at them in the content browser, but does that give you a good indication of actually how big and how wide these things are going to be when you use them? So Control B, find it, click on the use, and now you can see every single one of those is being used inside of here. I can just pull myself back and you can see they're obviously all expanded, but they're all using the correct static meshes. Now maybe I'm not happy with the actual density of this. I could drop down the looseness and bring them back together, but you know, that's only just pulling them together. It's not really giving me more trees. So maybe we play around with this points per square meter, increase that there to 0.05, and I've got way more trees. Again, I'm just going to play from here just to see what this looks like. I know I've got this window over the top, but you can play and you can see what the actual kind of, you know, the feel of this is going to be. And this kind of feels all right. I feel this has got a nice density. It's not too enclosed. We've got to think that there's going to be other things in this big empty space. There's going to be rocks, there's going to be grass and flowers, bushes. So there's going to be a lot of things that we can fill up this space with. It's not just going to be this empty landscape area. Okay, so the last little bit that we're going to do in this static mesh spawner is just think about how many of the different types of trees that we have. We could filter before we get to these, and we could say, I want to use 60% of the points to spawn the big trees and 40% on the lower. But if we're just spawning something that has, and notice that all of these have very similar sizes in terms of their actual footprint on the floor, well, what I could do now is I can actually come in here and I can search for weight, and every single one of them has a weight of 1. 1 is the minimum, the default that they have to be at. You can't go lower than 1, but we can increase this, and it basically becomes like a ratio of how many of these meshes in comparison to the other we have. Now I know that Pine 3, if we just look at, you know, this one down here, look at its name over here, Pine 5 is quite a small one, so maybe I want to leave just a couple of the small ones for now. Maybe I want to have a couple more of, which one's this one, Pine 4. So here's Pine 4. If I increase this number here to 2, and we should, let's have a little look, press 2, we should see that now there's a slight increase in the amount of Pine 2s that there are. And if we just want to make it much stronger, let's go with 5. Now you can see that it's 5 times more likely than it was for that one to actually be spawned. So you can play around with these different values. If you want to have lots of the very tall ones, you can obviously, you know, make that have a much higher number. And it's just a case of messing around with these weightings. Yeah, we can even push this out to blueprints later and start messing around with that so that we can define it on each instance of this. But for now, I've got a few less of the small trees, much more of the really tall trees. And I'm using these to spawn static meshes inside of my volume. Obviously, there's a couple more issues that we want to sort with these in terms of how uniform they are, how they're all the exact same size, the same rotation. But we'll explore that in other videos where we look at further nodes that we can add in between here to start messing around with the points that we're creating in order to make these static meshes feel a bit more non-uniform and unique. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.